Колеги, продовжуємо робочий день в прес-центрі України.
Continue our working day. Now we'll be talking about analysis of human rights violations in occupied Crimea of the first 6 months of 2016. Mr. Eskender Bariev, representative of the Mejlis of the Crimean Tatar people. The floor is yours. Thank you. Good afternoon, esteemed ladies and gentlemen, esteemed journalists. The public is always interested, the Ukrainian and foreign public is always interested in what is the situation in Crimea, what is the situation of the indigenous Crimean Tatar people, Krimchaks, citizens of Ukraine, those who continue to live on the occupied territory, what are the events taking place, and to make this process more systematic, the Crimean Tatar Center, starting from January 2016, has started preparing a monthly report, and we call it the Chronicles, monthly chronicles of human rights violations in occupied Crimea. You can see this visually. That is what we publish every month in Russian and English, and that is done so that all people, all experts, all the journalists who are interested in Crimea can get a very brief visual information to present and to understand what's happening in Crimea. We have been doing it for half a year, and in the process of this work, the experts of Crimean Tatar Resource Center got an idea to systematize this information and to prepare the half-year report. When we systematized this material, there was an idea to make an analysis of the violations of human rights in occupied Crimea for the first half year of 2016. You will see now the slides where you will see the presentation. We tried to systematize it. We tried to present it as infographics. And in order to visually see it, to follow the dynamics of these violations, we systematize these different violations. We graphically show all these processes, and we are trying to connect that to the processes which are taking place in Crimea, and also how the authorities de facto react to what's happening with Crimean Tatar activists. I will talk about conclusions later, but you will visually see it all. The first slide shows right for life, freedom, safety. The victims in April in Crimea, the burnt body of Crimean Tatar and Vera Ismailov was discovered in May in Izyumovka. The Crimean Tatar Mumina Aliyeva was raped and killed in June near Ipiatri. The body of 19-year-old Johar Milyasanov was discovered. The authorities say that that is just some murders which may take place anywhere, but we believe that while the Crimean public does not raise this as an issue, there are no adequate actions taken by the so-called police in Crimea. And as you see, the representatives of the indigenous nation become the victims. Then right for life, freedom, safety, the missing in January, Ernesta Blezimova, Elvina Rezakova, they were found later, but unfortunately the circumstances of disappearance of some of them, like Elvina Rezakova, we still don't know what were the circumstances. Maybe the relatives are afraid to provide the full information. On the 11th of February, Marcel Alaudinov disappeared in Simferopol, and the criminal case hasn't been started. On the 11th of April, Arsen Aliyev was kidnapped. In Saki, we have the video how he was kidnapped in Saki on the 25th of May. In Bakhchisarai, the member of the Executive Committee of the World Congress of Crimean Tatars, Ervin Ibragimov, was also kidnapped. You probably saw this video when Ervin Ibragimov was kidnapped, and we still have no information on him. And the criminal case was started only after the public started demanding it. You can see on this graph the number of kidnapped people was big in April, May of 2016. And I will tell you later about this. The right for life, freedom, safety, illegal actions of occupational forces, and that is the section interrogation. In April and May we see how interrogations where the number of interrogations was increased. In April and May there was the meeting of the Executive Committee of the World Congress of Crimean Tatar in Lithuania, and in May, traditionally the Crimean Tatars organized mass events dedicated to deportation. And starting from April, you will see the dynamic of the increase of repression actions in the form of interrogations. The next one, and that is again illegal actions of the occupational authorities, searches. On the 11th of February, there were mass searches in homes of Crimean Muslims. 4 were accused in being connected to the activity of Hizb Tahrir, and then on the 12th of May, there were mass searches in Bakhchisarai, Salachik, in homes of Crimean Muslims. There were searches in mosques, schools, and houses of Crimean Muslims. And as I have mentioned before, we see that April and May, that's when the peak was. The next one is arrests. In the result of mass searches in February, Crimean Muslims were arrested. They were accused in being connected to the activity of Hizb Tahrir. The number of arrests increased before the 18th of May. On the 12th of May, after searches in Bakhchisarai, Crimean Muslims were arrested. They were accused in being attached to Hizb Tahrir. Also, the so-called Court of Crimea prolongs the terms of keeping in detention Akhtem Chigoz, Muhyiddin Alivapov, and others. And if you again follow the dynamic, we see that the middle of April and May, that's when the number of those arrests went up. The detentions. The detentions in occupied Crimea are now massive. In January, the journalist Eskender was detained. In February, and the law enforcers detained some Crimean Muslims. Also, Russian special forces detained the activists of Ukrainian Cultural Center when they were entering Crimea on the 1st of April in Pionierska. The armed people detained and took to an investigation committee 35 Crimean Tatars. On the 7th of May, 25 Crimean Tatars were detained in Yevpatoria. On the 6th of May, and the law enforcers came during Friday namaz to the mosque, and they took about 100 people out, and they told them they should go to the investigation committee. On the 18th of May, the law enforcers detained the participants of auto rally dedicated to the memory of the victims of deportation. On the 30th of May, the bodyguards detained Zairka, Kadyrov, and Aliya Zenbash. You see again that middle of April and May, that's when there are most cases. The next is violation of rights for freedom of movement.
On February 18th, the Russian special forces did not allow Anastasia Ringas, Ukrainian journalist, to enter Crimea. The biggest cases on preventing the freedom of movement was registered in March. Thus, Crimean national Rustem was prohibited to enter Crimea till 2020. Rustem Umerov was prohibited to enter Crimea by 2021. Then his car was arrested. And in this chart, you see that the biggest number of cases on prevention of the freedom of movement was in March. The next human right on the freedom of religious beliefs. The biggest oppressed religious community in the occupied Crimea is Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Kiev Patriarchate. Then in February, the Muslim Cultural Center was first encircled and then churched. One of the teachers in Crimean schools forced children to watch movie, Russian propagandist movie about Crimean Tatars. Crimean Tatars, the way home. Some children at school were prohibited to dance their national Crimean Tatar dances. All these cases prove that there is a continuous pressure at the informational and cultural level, pressure on Crimean residents. It's not exhaustive list of cases, but nevertheless it is representative. Violation of the right on freedom of assembly. On March 17th, the Simferopol court decided that public rallies and entertaining events should be prohibited. Ukrainian Cultural Society was prohibited to hold the event devoted to Taras Shevchenko University. On May 17th, so-called local authorities in Crimea imposed ban on commemorational events devoted to the partition of Crimean Tatars on May 18th. And here we clearly see that Ukrainians were prevented from commemorating the birthday of Shevchenko in March, and you see this on the chart. And then in April, the violation of the right on freedom assembly dropped to 0, and then in May it sharply went up when Crimean Tatars tried to hold massive rallies devoted to commemoration of the deportation, violation of the rights of minorities and indigenous people. Ukrainian songs were prohibited on radio. Also, there were some detentions of people for posts in the internet. You see that the chart is again sharply fluctuating. It is similar to the previous chart devoted to the freedom of belief. Here you see the same situation with the minority rights. So in April and May, you see the sharp violation of the rights of minorities. This is due to the Congress of Crimean Tatars in Lithuania in February. In March, there was prohibition of Mejlis of Crimean Tatar people. First, this was done via administrative measures. Immediately after Congress of Crimean Tatars in Lithuania, then immediately upon our meeting in the Sejm of Lithuania, Crimean prosecutor's office issued a ban as to Mejlis, and in April 2016, the Crimean court made decision about prohibition of Mejlis. Then all the Crimean Tatar symbols and signs were prohibited. This was not done officially, but when our children tried to put on T-shirts with the national, with ethnic symbol of Crimean Tatar people, the sign of Tamga, they are prohibited to do this by other people. Then the violation of the right on fair justice and legal aid. It's not a fiction, but it's real story that in the courts, judges systemically deny deny many claims. Then they illegally transfer some arrested people to the territory of Russian Federation. In one case, this was 3 suspects, and in another case of so-called Crimean Tatar, this was 3 suspects who were transferred to Russia. This is statistics for the first 6 months of this year, because later I will mention more fresh statistics. I mentioned transfers of detained prisoners. Oleg Sentsov and Alexander Kostenko were transferred to Irkutsk and Chelyabinsk. They were immediately directed to the quarantine department in the hospital, and later Firat Seyfulayev, Nuri Primov, Rustem Vaitov, Ruslan Zaytulayev were transferred also to Rostov-on-Don in Russia in so-called Hizb ut Chabad case. This was again done illegally, and they are prevented from meeting Ukrainian consular. Then deportation. An expert from the Independent Center for Political Research, Ms. Tishchenko, registered the case of Orthodox monks' deportation. This happened in February, and the pretext was that they violated the passport regime. Then mobilization and enrollment into military service. As of today, we cannot say that young people are enrolled to the army very actively, but they receive a lot of summons to arrive to the military commissions, and this is absolutely illegal. This is violation of the International UN Convention from 1949. Violation of the right for physical and psychological health. Gennady Afanasyev was diagnosed with an infectional disease. Alexander Kostenko was prevented from access to medical services and treatment, and because of not curing and not providing medical services to these people, the situation was of their health considerably deteriorated. Gennady Afanasyan experienced tortures and a lot of mocking on behalf of the law enforcement agencies. His health deteriorated considerably. Rifat Alimov's health also deteriorated very much. The land and property rights. Crimean diocese of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Kiev Patriarchy experiences considerable deprivation in the land and property rights, that they were deprived from there was an attempt to deprive them from the main cathedral of Volodymyr and Olga in Simferopol. There were attempts to deprive Mejlis from its religious buildings in Simferopol. The Father Kyrilenko from Simferopol approved and claimed that one of the buildings of the religious center which belonged to his church was occupied by Russian authorities. Illegal crossing of the border and the violation of the administrative border. All the processes at the border and all the violations jumped up sharply in April and May. This was done intentionally to terrify and intimidate both Ukrainian citizens in Crimea and Ukrainian citizens presence on mainland. Of course, that information that I gave to you today, it is not exhaustive information. It's maybe we omitted something, but nevertheless, we have 3 victims. We have 5 missing people. The general total number of illegal actions, the interrogations, 112 searches, 20, etc. Violation of the freedom of movement, 15, violation of the right on religious beliefs, 20, violation of the right on peaceful assembly, 7, etc. The right for fair justice, 67, transfer beyond the borders of Crimea, transfer of prisoners, 11, the right on health, 6, land violation of land and property rights, 16, etc. Based on that statistics, we could say that all the offenses against Tatars and Ukrainians in Crimea by occupational authorities are of political nature. The dynamics of repressions in Crimea is closely tied with the activities of the Crimean Tatar national bodies, or with historical dates which traditionally were and are being commemorated by Tatars or Ukrainians with massive rallies. For example, sharp growth of repressions in April and May could be assessed as a response to the executive committee of the Crimean Tatar Congress in Lithuania in April, and on May 18th, after commemoration of the deportation. Thank you for your attention. I think that this materials might be interesting for journalists and experts. We continue to collect information to monitor the violations of human rights in Crimea. And after next 6 months, from July through December, we will produce new report in January.
Якраз середину
The middle of February probably is another peak. That was the anniversary when Crimean Tatars went to the meeting against Russian occupation. February, yes, thank you. This is, we were trying to demonstrate it as the day of resistance, the day of fight for our rights, for the integrity of our people. Have you been collecting this data by just the people of your resource center and our experts? Were collecting information that we were receiving from our representatives, our activists who work in Crimea, and we were trying to disseminate it in the mass media so that many people know that. The next one is content analysis, gathering information that was published by our partners the journalists as well who work in Crimea and who provide such information. That's the information of information agencies. So this way we collected all the information. We are trying to verify this information, and only then we try to systematize it, to demonstrate and to see the dynamics, the processes. Russian Federation at the international level states that there are no political processes, that the terrorists are Islamists. In Crimea they are fighting against terrorism and extremism. But we, thanks to this presentation, we show clearly the reaction of occupational forces to activities of the citizens of Ukraine who live in Crimea, and we see a clear picture, and that again proves that all the processes taking place in Crimea are of political nature. Did you give this materials to some international organizations, Amnesty International, Monitoring Mission? This is the first place where we are making such presentation, this analysis. Thanks to the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center will be published and wider. And circles of people will learn about that, and it will be placed on the websites of Crimean Tatar Resource Center in Russian and in English, and we will share it with our partners, international organizations. Only in close cooperation with international organizations we'll be able to achieve some success. Any questions? UCMC, a clarification. As far as I remember, no human rights organizations are allowed to get to Crimea. So are these some separate people, individuals, or are these some organizations that were providing information? There are some activists in Crimea, and just regular citizens help us. Those who do care about what's happening in Crimea, they give us information. Very often we try to verify such information, and only after we verify it, we publish it. Also, when there are some cases when, for example, a person is kidnapped, then we believe that we need to state about that very loudly. The sooner we state about that case, the more chances these people who were kidnapped or who are missing have to stay alive, not to be tortured. This is especially true when it comes to people who are detained or arrested. It is important for us to preserve life and the health of the people who fall under repressions, and that is why we will be always stating loudly about any violation that is taking place in Crimea. Thank you. I would like to remind to journalists these materials will be on the website of the Crimean Tatar Resource Center and our website. It will be in Ukrainian, in Russian, and in English language. Thank you. Thank you.